Episode 28. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, Dogmen. Our first guest for tonight's show is Tara Babcock. Tara, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tara, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 31 years old, married, mother of two, anthropology student working on my bachelor's degree. I have a background in folklore, too, so I'm not like a complete nutcase. I live in Idaho, Pocatello, Idaho, to be exact, but I was born and raised in Wyoming, and that's where the story that I'm going to tell today takes place.
The encounter that you're about to talk about, that's not one that you personally experienced. Please tell us about how you came to find out about this encounter.
When I was about 18, my first roommate that I ever had was a guy named Jim. He was a few years older than me. He had graduated school probably, I think, 3 or 4 years ahead of me, so he was a bit older. And we roomed together for about 6 months. He was a really, really nice guy, very interesting guy. But one night we were up talking late. The conversation turned towards paranormal experiences. I'm a lifelong paranormal enthusiast, and he also was very interested in that stuff. And we started talking about encounters that we had had. And he told me this story about he and his friends. And it freaked me out pretty good.
Oh, I can understand why after finding out about all the details on what happened. That's easy to understand. Now, when did Jim's encounter actually happened?
He didn't tell me the year exactly, but I know that it was the year that he graduated high school, which would have been about 92 or 93.
Around 92 or 93. Yeah, that was when the whole Beast of Bray Road thing was kind of winding down. When did you find out about this encounter from Jim?
He told me about this, I believe it was 1999.
If you don't mind, please go ahead and tell us all about this encounter Jim had.
Well, Jim went to high school in this little town in northeastern Wyoming. I can't remember the exact name of it. I have to pull up a map or something. But it's in the northeast corner of the state. Tiny, tiny little town. Just one of those places that nobody ever really goes to. Like, the train stopped coming and everything in the town pretty much stopped. So just like a nowhere, nothing, speck on the map type of town. He and his friends had heard about a party that was happening at a person that they went to school with was having a party at their parents' house that night. But their parents lived out on a dirt road about 20 miles out of town. So the whole area was kind of generally known as being very creepy at night. And my friend Jim didn't really want to go. But he was the only one with the car, and his friends talked him into it. So they all piled in and started driving out of town towards where this person's house was supposed to be. It got dark as they were driving, and there are just a lot of, like, little dirt roads that, like, have, like, no signs on them. So after they've been driving for about an hour and hadn't found the house yet, they figured they must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. So they turned around and tried to find the road that they had taken to get back to. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the road, there was this thing. And they pulled the car to a stop about 20 feet ahead of it. He described it as like a mass of fur. It just looked like a huddle of fur, is what he said, like laying in the middle of the road. And it was huge. And all of them looked at it and they were like, well, what the f*** is that? They figured, it's Wyoming, it must be roadkill or something, but who's going to get out and drag it over to the side of the road so that we can drive around it? And they were arguing about that. And then it started to move. And it stood up. It was fully illuminated in the headlights of the car. Jim said that it was about 7 feet tall. It had the body of a man, but it was completely covered with like a thick, dark fur, but like really short. But it was still like short enough that he could see like the pectoral muscles kind of like rippling underneath the fur. And he said the head was what freaked him out worst. He said it was shaped like a German shepherd with a long pointed snout and pointy, like, ears, and its eyes were, like, glowing green, like in the headlights of the car, and the thing was just huge, and none of them had no idea what they were looking at first, And Jim realized at that point that it was staring back at them, and it was holding a dead rabbit in its hand. And as soon as he realized that, he said the thing looked at the rabbit in its hand, looked at the teenagers in the car in front of it, then threw the rabbit to the side and started taking a step towards the car. Well, they lost it, obviously. They just flipped the car around, got out of there as soon as they could, and just drove out of that area. They didn't end up making it to the party at night at all. And he told me that he tried to tell himself it was a bear, it was a wildcat or something, but everybody in the car was like, no, dude, that was nothing we've ever seen before. It was like a werewolf dogman thing. I don't know. Like, even as he was telling me this story all these years later, I could see that, like, the hair on his arms was actually standing up, and, like, he was shaking still. It still frightened him that much. And I believe him. I'm way freaked out to go driving around that part of Wyoming at night, still, to this day.
Before we get into the questions here, Tara, something I want to share. I always get frustrated when people ask me or say to me that they wish so badly that they could have a dogman encounter of their own. They listen to the show, they read stories about other people's encounters, and for whatever reason they get the impression that it would be cool to maybe have one of these encounters. I always tell them, no, you don't want to have an encounter with one. And like I was telling you in the pre-interview, in most cases, then it switches at that point over to them telling me that they wish they could at least see one. They want to see a picture of a dogman. And like I told you in the pre-interview, I always tell them, no, you don't want to see a dogman, even in a picture, because there's life before you know what one of these things looks like, and then there's life after you know what one of these things looks like. Out of curiosity, you said that they thought that this big, dark subject in the road was roadkill of some kind. Was it perfectly motionless in the road, and that's why they thought that? Or if that's the case, I wonder why it was laying in the road like that without moving.
That's what I wondered, too, about the story. But he said that, yeah, they totally confused it for roadkill at first because it was just lying there. It was completely motionless. It has a dead rabbit. I don't know what it was doing with the dead rabbit, but yeah, it was just so still at first that they totally thought that it was just a dead animal of some kind. So yeah, I've wondered about that too. Like, what was it doing? I don't know. Maybe I don't want to think about it too much.
Yeah, that is pretty strange. You said that Jim told you that they were about to have someone get out of the car and walk up on it. Can you imagine being the one that drew that short straw and had to be out there with it, walking up on it when it decided to come to life and stand up and turn around? That would be a bad scene.
Oh my gosh, that'd be the scariest thing I can imagine. Like, I've just heard the story secondhand, and I saw Jim's face and I saw how frightened he was still, and I can only imagine what the people in that car must have been feeling. He did make a statement to me when I asked him about it, like, well, what did it look like? And he told me that, like, it was like looking at something like that you know can't exist almost hurts your brain in a way. Like, he felt like his eyes were trying to make him see something else instead of what he was seeing in front of him. Like, no, I'm not seeing that. I can't be seeing that. Well, what is it then? And it's disturbing to your brain and like a shock to your system on multiple levels, it seems, to actually experience something like this.
When Jim was telling you about this encounter, you mentioned the reaction that you noticed him having. Did he suffer from nightmares, PTSD, anything like that you know of?
Yeah, he actually did. He has some pretty serious PTSD issues, actually, and some nightmare issues. I was actually a really good guess. Or maybe not a guess, because you know a lot of people who do these things. He was disturbed. He wasn't a religious guy at all, but he had a cross, like a silver cross necklace, blessed, and he wore it all the time because he was worried that this thing was following him. Like, he didn't have any reason to think that. He just was worried that, like, this thing had seen him in his friends' faces, and he was worried that it somehow would always know where he was or something. I think it honestly, like, touched off some kind of paranoia in him or something, because he was a very disturbed man when I knew him. And it all seemed to kind of stem from this incident that happened when he was in high school.
Well, after seeing something like that and living through a situation like that, I could understand him feeling that way. It's going to leave an impression on you, unfortunately. You mentioned your interest in the paranormal, Tara. Before Jim even told you about this encounter, I guess it's a safe bet that you already believed in Bigfoot and other cryptids like that?
I don't know about, like, believe is a really strong word. I'm definitely open-minded to all of those things, though. I do find cryptids to be completely more plausible than, like, say, I don't know, guardian angel stories.
My next question for you is, after having a chance to see Jim's reaction to that encounter that he had, do you have an interest in having an encounter of your own with one of these things?
No. I know that they exist, and that is so enough for me. I don't ever want to see one of these things.
You sure?
Ever. Yes. Absolutely sure.
That's wise. That's a good answer right there. Yeah, you don't want to see one. It's good that you realize that. I found out about Jim's encounter by reading a thread that you started on a website called reddit.com. Is that the only place where you posted the details of Jim's encounter, or did you post those details in other places as well?
I had also posted it on a website called Jezebel. Every year around Halloween, they have an annual Share Your True Spooky Stories with Us contest. And I had posted it there before, too. I got similar reactions from people. Most people immediately are like, werewolf! And I don't know, that's probably not a great way to describe these things. But, yeah, I've shared a couple other places on the internet, mostly with like-minded members of the paranormal community. I'm not interested in going and sharing stories with people who are just going to tell me what a liar my roommate is, what a liar I am, so.
Like I told you in the pre-interview, one of the things that is so frustrating is when I go into a forum like that where people tend to go and post their encounters where they see things like Dogmen. It's so frustrating when I read a thread like that and I see all the negative posts by all the idiots that try to shoot down what these people are saying. These people go to these forums to try and find help because it would seem they don't know where else to go to get help in the first place. And then, as a result, after having bared their souls to talk about these traumatic encounters that they've had with dogmen, to have these idiots make fun of them and say all the cruel things that some of them say, it's just so frustrating. It drives me crazy. Do you think that if you would have been giving the details of an encounter that you personally had had yourself compared to relaying the details that Jim had shared with you, do you think the reaction that you got in those online forums would have been any different?
I absolutely think it would have been different. Well, it would have been more personal, definitely. Because it wasn't my own story, it's just what I was relating secondhand. They're not really attacking me, because I'm just relating the story as I heard it. If it had been my encounter, people would have been so much more brutal. I mean, they would have been saying all those things about me. You're crazy. You misidentified this thing, whatever. So I think the fact I'm just relating a secondhand encounter sort of shields me from a lot of the criticism that the people who have these encounters must just get directly. I mean, it's no wonder that more people don't come forward because they're just mocked at every turn, you know? Like, there's really nowhere for these people to go. I mean, to have an experience like this and then to not even really be able to find a place within the paranormal community to share it with without being mocked is just, I mean, that's got to compound it so much more and just make it even more painful. And I really feel for those people.
Well, you're not alone. I feel for them too. That was the biggest reason, Tara, why I created Dogman Encounters Radio and the websites as well. As more and more time goes by, I hope more and more people like Jim find out about Dogman Encounters and reach out. Now, having said all that, after Jim told you about that encounter, did you go crazy researching the Dogman topic every chance you got, or how did you handle it?
Well, when I first heard the story, it was sort of pre-internet days, at least as we know it now. There wasn't really forums you could go on or anything. sometimes you could go to chat rooms that were themed around paranormal encounters or something, but there wasn't really like the wealth of information. It wasn't really gathered yet or accessible. So I didn't really do a lot of research, but I certainly reached out to people and tried to encourage them to share their stories with me, no matter how strange they sounded. Because I think one thing that this whole thing really impressed upon me was that these people, you have to listen. Sometimes things are going to sound so crazy, but these people are telling the truth, and once you've accepted that they're telling the truth, then you really have to honestly engage with what they're saying. That these things exist, and what are we going to do about it now, basically?
That's a really good question. Really makes you wonder what the future of all this is. Will one ever be discovered and brought forth? Who knows? If I had to bet, I would say no, but time will tell. Did you ever do any digging into finding out if any other encounters had occurred in that area where Jim had his in Wyoming?
I actually did, and actually found out some really pretty interesting stuff. Around that area, there's actually a local legend about a hellhound, or at least something that people call a hellhound, that is supposed to stalk around those hills there. And that a lot of kids who were raised in that town that I actually talked to told me that their parents wouldn't allow them to play outside at night because of this thing that was supposedly stalking around in those foothills, what they call the hellhound. I wondered later if maybe the two were connected, if perhaps what people were referring to as a hellhound in the local lore was actually this thing that my friend and his friend saw that night. I think it might be connected. I think it's highly likely.
It just might be. They do go down on the four legs, and when they do, they can look a lot like what you would expect a hellhound to look, so I wouldn't be surprised. Well, Tara, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Just that, to everybody who's had a strange encounter like this, know that not everybody is going to call you a liar. There are people out here who've had the same experiences, and we're looking for you, too. So keep looking, and we'll find each other.
Really good words. Well, thanks again so much for coming on, Tara. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely.
Oh, thank you. Don't be a stranger, okay?
Okay, I absolutely will not.
Sounds good. Well, have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Our second guest for tonight's show is Jonathan Barber. If you'll remember, Jonathan was the guest for episode 14. John, welcome back to the show.
Vic, how you doing?
I'm doing really good. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much.
John, we talked about a lot of interesting topics last time around when you came on the show, episode 14. I wanted to invite you back to talk about some other topics that we didn't have a chance to cover, and also I know that you've got some updates for us about some of the topics you did cover in episode 14. The first topic I wanted to ask you about tonight is to do with your life and how it's changed now that you know the Dogmen are out there.
Oh, wow. What a question. For me, I know that I can no longer really enjoy going into the woods. I love going into the woods. I love spending time having campfires, relaxing, enjoying nice long walks back bush, let alone going back there at nighttime. Just during the day, those are issues. And I love the wild. I love that stuff. And I used to spend a lot of time back there. I was actually known for going back out in the bush, and people would ask why, and I'm like, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's relaxing, it's fun. I just love that stuff. I love it a lot. And of course, once I found through interviewing people and my own experience, it's not something I can really leisurely do anymore. It's not like walking through your living room. There's something real out there, and it's not fictional. It reminds you of something fictional, but it's not. It's Dogman. And they're real, and unfortunately, potentially very dangerous. I can say, though, that before I encountered a Dogman, well, not encountered, it exactly, but I mean the experience I had with what I did back bush. Let's just say that you can really never count on when it's going to be there, when it's not going to be there. You never know. I mean, you think you're safe in some just urban-like setting, not necessarily. I mean, the reports that people have came out with, it's unnerving. I mean, when I think about this, you have to understand that I have to go back into my head and relive a few things that I've experienced. When you run into something in the woods that charges you, and you think you know what it is, it turns out to be something, and there's nothing in the world that matches this, especially where you're from. And there's only one thing it could match, at least one of a couple of things it could match. And it seems to have the brass tacks to charge you like that. There's only one thing in my mind it could have been. I'm telling you, there was only probably one thing that saved my life. And that was because I think I confused it. And I'm telling you, when you have an experience like I had, which is hard to explain to people, really hard unless you've been there, it's even difficult to talk about. I'm sitting here reliving it in my head at this moment when I'm talking about it, and I'm like, just, whoa, you know? And you never really 100% get over it. And when someone says, well, you enjoyed your life so much before by going out and having campfires and nothing happened to you, it's like, you gotta understand, they're not common, they're very rare. But when they're in an area, they're in an area, and their potential for them to be there is just a roll of the dice. I mean, sure, you probably have better odds in a casino, but the fact of the matter is, Dogman, you don't want to get double zeros.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I've spent a lot of time out in the woods myself, nighttime included. It just gives me chills wondering, with all the situations I had put myself in, way out in the middle of nowhere, daytime and at nighttime, I can't help but wonder how many times I might have been watched by one of these things. That's not to say that I was. It just makes you wonder, like you were talking about there before. I want to transition into another topic that kind of ties into this. Something that I've put a lot of thought into for quite some time now is whether or not to come out and talk about the topic of whether they do or don't attack on the show here. When I started the show, there were a lot of rules that I put in place for myself as guides on how I wanted to do things. One of the most important things to me when I did start the show was to be honest with the listeners. Having said that, I can't hide the fact that I do know of some Dogman attacks that have taken place. Understand that I'm trying to be very careful with how I present this. I don't want to unnecessarily scare anyone listening to this, but I do think it's very important that people know dogmen will attack a person given a certain set of circumstances. Every indication would make it appear that it's a very, very rare circumstance when something like this would happen. But it would appear that, at least on occasion, it does happen. What's your whole take, John, on this attack topic?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I've put a lot of thought into Dogman, and if anybody really listens to Dogman Encounters, your show, and really listen to all the encounters that people have had, as well as other encounters and stories, they'll quickly see how many things match up. And these are people that are not trained. They're not socially trained to make stuff up or to even, they don't even know that much about the topic, let alone details that other people have had. And one of the things I've noticed is it's overwhelming in every case how vicious they are, how ferocious they are. These dogmen are absolutely, I mean, I've done a lot of research since like 2004, before dogman was even a word that people used that I noticed. I used to have to look at werewolf. I used to get all these movies and, you know, and that's what I would find when I wanted to, you know, I had to really be specific. That's how I found that one. It wasn't a post, it was a site, a native site, years ago. That's how I learned about one of the situations where the natives used to have this dogman sneak into their camp and kill their dogs. And when they hunted it down, it screamed like a man when they killed it. There's some stories out there that are similar to that, where they would hear very strange stuff come from these creatures, which it's hard to say. I mean, some could be misinterpreted. But the point is, how dangerous could these things be? Well, the fact of the matter is, they have shown to be violent with animals. I mean, animals that me and you would consider lovable, wonderful pets, they would kill them. No problem. I mean, sometimes they seem kind of callous and cruel, you know, and inhumane in my opinion, and sometimes almost come across as being, in the way that they act, is a little bit, I think it's on the borderline of sadistic, but they don't really cross that for what people see. I mean, most animals, like most wolves, are not like that. People have to understand the differences between Dogman and wolves are actually there's quite a lot of differences when it comes to the way they act with people. They have a lot of similarities, actually quite a lot, but the difference here socially is pretty big. And this part is, you don't hear people talk about this, like when they attack. I mean, sometimes there are researchers out there, very well-known ones you hear about all the time, who talk about Dogman. And the one thing they don't talk about, they'll kind of go over it, like Dogman attacks. They'll say, oh, you know, I've heard about a few Dogman attacks, they'll say. But, they talk about like it wasn't serious, or it was something that maybe it was made up. You have to understand something. How many animals on this planet do we know of that are vicious, that are very, not necessarily like heartless or just, evil or anything like that. They're just extremely ferocious and violent in the way that they act. How many of them would never hurt a human? And the answer is none of them. Bears have been known to kill and eat people. If you ever see a bear, they're afraid of people. Dogman isn't. There's hunters out there that hunt bears, and to them it's just I had a great day out. I got a bear. That's the way they think. Now, if you run into a Dogman, when they run into a Dogman, first of all, they stop hunting. They say it was the most ferocious, violent thing they ever seen. They thought they were gonna die. Okay? There are plenty of times where these things don't kill people. But when it comes down to anger, and these things, that's the one trait, one emotion they seem to have more than anything, is straight up anger. Anger becomes violence. And no one can say that doesn't happen. These things don't like humans. And when you take anger with I don't like, and you mix in an encounter, there's going to be violence. It'll eventually happen. If it has happened, you probably just didn't hear about it. They said it was something else. My opinion, it is very rare, like Vic says. I just don't see it actually not happening like some other researchers out there have said. And it doesn't make any sense. It's against the laws of nature. I mean, that's the nature of the beast, is to be ferocious and angry. Anger will eventually turn into violence. We know this as a society. And to say that won't happen, or that they won't attack you, kind of ridiculous. I mean, I don't think it'll happen. If you run into one, stay calm. Don't necessarily run away, because that might cause an issue unless you can feel like you can slip away. But if they want you, there's nothing you can do about it, unfortunately. And that's why I say, just stay out of the woods. I mean, I say to people, don't be afraid. Just be educated. Learn about it. Understand that these things could do violence to you. I mean, I'd like to sum this up a lot quicker, but, it's one of those things that's not talked about enough out there. And because it's not talked enough about out there, someone has to get into the nitty-gritty. They have to. They have to say, hey, is it not logical something this angry and this ferocious eventually won't cross the line? Most of the time I think they just want to chase us away. But honestly, there are plenty of times where they think, you know what, I'm going to take this guy out. Or they're just going to react. And a lot of the time, anger is simply a reaction. And there must have been accidents. And I don't mean simply just an accidental incursion where you run into the back of it or something and it elbows you in the head. I'm talking about death, really, or severe injury. And by no means could this be something that doesn't happen. I think, honestly, what it is that most people think animal attacks are probably to do with other animals. And it turns out to really be a Dogman. Or, of course, there's the missing people thing. You hear about David Paulides talking about the missing people. Now, if you really read his books and look into it, he clearly says that these well, it's not that what he says is that what he shows is that they can't be all to do with animals. These have to be done by something else. But these things definitely could have to do with some people that are missing, and it's not surprising whatsoever.
You know, it's not easy to come out and talk about this. It would have been so much easier to perpetuate the myth that they are a look but don't touch creature. When you listen to episodes of this show or other shows where Dogman encounters are talked about, and you hear about how this ferocious-looking dogman approached someone, they had them dead to rights, but when all was said and done, they didn't harm a hair on the person's head. It's easy to think that every encounter ends that way, but I'm telling you, that's not how it is. The people that go through such a traumatic experience, it's not hard to understand why they wouldn't want to come on a show like this and relive what they unfortunately had to go through with an audience. They just want some answers. They want to make some sense out of what happened, if it's possible to do that, and then move on with their lives the best way they know how. So what I'm saying here is, don't think that just because you don't hear about encounters like that on this show, don't think for a second that attacks don't happen. That's what I'm trying to say here. Now, having said that, yeah, you could be attacked by a bear, you could be attacked by a fox out in the woods. Just because this has happened and apparently on very rare occasion continues to happen, that doesn't mean that if you live next to a woods, you can count on being jumped if you go out to refill the bird feeder in the backyard. Moving forward, John, you know about a situation where a person was attacked. You've got some updates about a story that you shared last time around on episode 14. Please tell us about that.
Absolutely. Just before I go into that, though, can I comment on what you just said?
Sure.
First of all, it's brave of you as a host to come out and say this. And you are not saying this for ratings. You're saying this for one reason, and it's because it has to be said. One of the things I realized about your show is that you share real concrete information. Stuff I've learned for a long period of time. I've come to know some things, and on your show you bring those things up on your own findings and things that you've done from interviewing people and whatnot. You don't hold back. I mean, I'm sort of sick and tired of these candy floss interviews with people. Sometimes you hear them, everyone knows what I'm talking about. And they don't get down to the brass tacks about stuff. They just want to talk about the lighthearted stuff, and they don't want to get into the nitty-gritty. People know these kind of interviews. I would rather be told the truth. You know what I mean? I'd rather hear the facts. I mean, we're so sick and tired in this world of hearing a bunch of stuff about candy floss. It's just no meat and potatoes. You want the real meat. You want to get down to the facts and what's going on. Like you just mentioned the bears. You know, that's a great example. I mean, how many bears are out there? I mean, the different kinds of bears. There are a lot of bears. But how many people get attacked by bears? Well, you know, there are bear attacks. No, but they're not that many compared to other encounters with bears. I've actually had a bear encounter before. And trust me, I knew it was a bear encounter right away. Bears are very animated and that they're there and they want you to know they're there. And they're not really looking for people to encounter. In fact, they're scared of people. And they don't want to have to engage people, really. There's the odd bear out there that's a man-eater. But the fact of the matter is, there's not nearly as many dogmen as there are bears. And we rarely have dogman encounters that are violent with death involved. Or, you know, violence or death involved, where they actually, you know, engage the human, or humans in that case. Well, then, think about it. If there actually are some accounts of people getting attacked, or they would attack, and they have such few numbers, and you compare them to the numbers of bears that attack and the bears that don't attack, just let that concept kind of sink in. Maybe these things are a little more dangerous than people led you on to think. And I'm not saying that to scare anybody either. I'm just saying that it's good to understand what you're dealing with so that you can take a more educated role in where you spend your vacation. You know, you can look around and be a little more observant about your surroundings. Not to be afraid, but just so you can be more informed, so you can make more informed decisions. So maybe you're not so relaxed and letting the kids run into the wilderness on their own, running around. Maybe they should just stay in the front yard, you know? Just little precautions like that sometimes make all the difference in the world. That's just all I wanted to say. And it is, like I said, Vic, it's very good of you to come out and say this. It's not good to give people, it doesn't feel good all the time. I mean, to come out and have to say to people, I don't mean to make you afraid, but sometimes they do attack. But the fact of the matter is, I would rather be a lot more informed than to go in the woods ignorant, thinking these things are my friend. When it comes right down to it, they would rather me not be around, and if not worse.
You know what, though, John? This is a double-edged sword here. I feel like it is my responsibility, having this information, to come out and present it, so that, just like you mentioned, people can make an informed decision on whether they want to go out and do certain things. At the same time, along the course of the way of doing this show, I've gotten quite a few emails and messages and other ways from people that have talked about how listening to the show and learning about the things with regards to dogmen that have been shared on the show, how all that has changed their lives, how they can't do certain things now that they used to love doing. Family outings, annual campouts. There's a guy that contacted me and told me how he used to leave his dog outside at night, and now he brings the dog inside and he battens down the doggy door at night because he's worried about a dogman coming through and all that. Being told stories like that from listeners, it really takes a toll on me knowing that I can negatively affect people like that. I feel like I'm doing them a service, like you just mentioned, but it really does take a toll, and I feel bad that by letting them know about this hidden information, I'm affecting their lives, unfortunately, in a negative way.
It's funny that you say this. I mean, again, you bring up a lot of good questions and things that trigger a lot of things in my head. And the one thing that you just mentioned there was you feel bad about this, but I'm going to be perfectly honest. I was a little too lax going back in the woods, even after my encounter. I was. And I just loved it so much, I just thought, it's funny, I'm like a lot of people out there that have heard about Dogman. I didn't realize that the potential for actual attack, for whatever reason, could really be there. And I never really thought much about it. People don't understand that when you're educated about something like this, and anyone can be, that you're dealing with something that is extremely real. This world is more than what we think in our little candy-coated boxes we live in. There's much more. I mean, people have to stick their heads out and understand that there's more. And take a look. It's not going to cost you anything to take a look. And I can understand when you say that you feel bad about having to, say to people, these things attack, and warning people, and now they can't really do certain things they love. But you know what? Personally, I thank you, because after learning what I've learned, even in more detail, throughout your series of interviews you've done up to this point, I'm more informed, and I would much, much rather be alive in one piece than to be attacked by a dogman. People have said, what's it likely being attacked by a dogman? If you want to use your imagination, I would say not really get into it because it's kind of a bummer, but let's just say that there's a lot of werewolf movies out there that are pretty accurate. Not that they think they're werewolves, they're different creatures, but when it comes to the tools they use, they're not that different. And if you think that's scary in a werewolf movie, well, in real life it's probably many times scarier. So I would say, hey, I would rather be safe and still find other ways to have fun and live my life than to be killed in the most horrific way I can imagine. So, I mean, trust me, Vic, they'll thank you later. Sometimes it's all to do with being thankful for what you haven't run into in life and things that haven't happened and staying safe. Safe doesn't necessarily mean boring. There's plenty of other things to do. I mean, I love going in the woods, but trust me, I find other things to do, and I'd much, much rather be in one piece than to have myself in a situation where I run into something like this.
You know of an update with regards to one of the topics we talked about last time around on episode 14 that touches on this topic. Tell us about what you found out about that Australian hunter and what happened to him.
I was going to coast from what you said right into this. That's one of those topics that not talked about enough on radio, so now we find ourselves having to go longer and deeper into it. It's just what happens when you run into the meat when it comes to a real interview with a really great host like yourself on a show where you're free to speak your mind and really share what really matters. I'll tell you right away, this thing that occurred on the last show, episode 14 I was on, basically I went through a very general description of something that happened. It was because I didn't have enough information at the time. I recently got some information when I first went on the interview, and I didn't have a chance to go into more detail with the person I got it from, which was actually my girlfriend. My girlfriend speaks like 5 different languages. And so she was watching an interview. Well, it was a documentary, but everything mentioned in the documentary, it is something that reflects on everything that's said about Dogman accurately. And it's accurate. It's like really ridiculously accurate. I see a lot of documentaries talking about Dogman, and a lot of them are just, they're there just to entertain. They don't really worry or take the time to consider the accuracy of the information from what I see, in my personal opinion. And I'm big on accuracy and truth. I'm very big on it. I get a little long-winded sometimes. I apologize for that. But it comes right down to it. People are worth it. They're worth getting as much solid, concrete evidence and truth as much as you can. In this world, I mean, it's full of lies. And I'll be perfectly honest. I'm willing to sign an affidavit saying that this is all true from my personal opinion, from as much as I can understand when it comes to interviews and my personal experiences, which you don't hear often. So with the things I'm about to say, I'm not making them up. They're as truthful as I can make them sound, because they are truthful. And you don't hear that every day. People usually have to be asked for that. I'm coming right out saying I would do that, no problem, because I'm not lying. I'm not deluded. I've done my homework, and I take a personal responsibility sharing this information. And the information that I got from her was something very solid, and it was very interesting. Basically, I stated in the last interview that a man was killed in Australia while looking for Dogman. And he was a 50-year-old man who was a Dogman researcher. And this was before the time of the internet. And so he had knowledge about some areas in Australia where Dogmen are known to be. In fact, some of the local people there at the time said, don't go into certain areas because they're there. And he wanted concrete evidence. This man seemed to be borderline obsessed, if not obsessed himself, which I think he would have to be to go after a Dogman. And he took his rifle, he went off into the woods, and he went looking for it. And while this man went out there in the woods to look for Dogman, this is what happened. Basically, he was not found for like 2 weeks. And when he was found, his head was removed from his body, and his gun was found with 2 shots missing. The police have looked at the area, and they figured out what happened. Apparently, he went off. He was shooting at something else, and it seems that something from above and then behind him clawed him from his heart all the way up through his neck to his head, decapitating him, removing his head. His heart was actually, I think the words my girlfriend described was utterly destroyed. It sliced his heart in pieces. I mean, that's a tough organ. And she said that the claws were like sharp knives. Even with sharp knives, the power it would take to do that is unimaginable. And it sliced up and took his head off, and then that was it. There was no other bite marks or anything else like that. If that happened anywhere else in the world, you can't actually say what it could be, because, see, animals don't just slice and walk away. Animals, what they do is they usually, like a bear, for example, will maul. They'll maul their target. They'll bite the target, come down, and there'll be multiple bite wounds and stuff like that. Nothing just slices and walks away. Even tigers and stuff like that. I mean, hunters know this. This was really, really screwy to the people there who didn't know about this stuff. And the wound was ridiculous. And he was found dead, decapitated. No part of him was eaten. Just that one hit. And they think whatever it was came down from the tree. And the funny thing is, I told my girlfriend this, and she didn't know this. She doesn't know everything about Dogman. I have to tell her a lot of things, actually. And I told her, did you know that they're known for going up into trees? You know, Vic, you're always saying that, hey, keep your eyes looking up, too. You know, I want to remind people of that, because you're right. because she told me this without knowing. We didn't know. If I didn't know this, and she told me this, and I told Vic would sit there and tell me, hey, they're known for going up into trees. You don't have people telling each other information that they don't know about and having it turn out to be lies like this. Like, these double-blind things are not something that you come across every day and have them turn out to be phony. It freaked me out.
You know what's ironic about that, too, is they also seem to prefer to attack from behind.
She didn't know that either. Yeah, that's really freaky. These things are cunning. Those scrolls they found in Egypt, they are ancient scrolls. And they talked about Dogman in detail, like we talk about on the show here. Like, all the interviews you have with people, this is stuff, a lot of those details were mentioned. Even how unkillable the thing is, unless you take a spear to the heart to them. Take a spear right into the heart, that'll kill them. I mean, you have people in the show talking about, shooting the thing, and it still comes at them. Some people think, well, I shot it in the chest, though. Like, Larry mentioned that. And he's a vet, and this guy has great aim, and I talked to the guy, he's a good guy. Honest. And I'm telling you, there's a good chance, I think, in my personal opinion, because I used to work out, so I understand what it takes for muscle to properly function. It takes a lot of strong bone. And so if the bone is big enough and strong enough, and this thing is like 7 feet tall, then the bone structure could be incredibly dense. So you can understand if it hit a rib and maybe chipped the rib or broke the rib, it might not necessarily be able to penetrate the heart or even hit the heart. So I can maybe understand why that didn't happen. Maybe. I'm just taking a guess here. I'm not an expert when it comes to bullets and guns and whatnot, but I can say that it takes a lot of bone, strong, dense bone, to sustain that level of strength. That's one of the things in nature that a lot of people don't understand about. So when this thing came down and actually sliced this man and took his head right off, they walked away, and they're very cunning. And he was firing at something else. If he was looking for a Dogman, I don't think he was shooting at koala bears, because he wouldn't want to give away his position. People there in the local area said that they were out there, not it was out there. And if these things are anything like wolves, they're going to be in packs. I mean, you said sometimes they run with coyotes. I mean, heck, where I live, there are coyotes. I've heard them even where I had my encounter once. I've heard coyotes in that exact area. I've heard them. I've encountered them. That's really freaky. That's some freaky stuff. And, when people say when they go in the woods hunting for Dogman, people need to understand that they're going to know you're there before you do. And I mean, before you know you're going to go there, but they're going to know that you're there before you think that they're even there. And the thing is, they have incredibly good senses, and that's one of the things it talks about in those scrolls, was they have really good senses. They're very cunning. They're very smart. They're very powerful. And they're hard to kill. And unfortunately, we're not talking about a horror film. We're talking about reality here. And it's just better to be informed than, be on a slab.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's funny you mentioned the whole Australia topic, because last week in the middle of the night, I received an email from a Yowie hunter who had taken some pictures, as it turns out, years ago, of what looked to me like bona fide Dogman prints he found in the Blue Mountains. I'm going to post some of those pictures that he sent me of those, what seemed to be Dogman prints. They look like Type 3 Dogman prints, to be more exact. I'm going to post some of those pics in the YouTube version of this show, so the listeners will have a chance to check them out and see what I'm talking about here.
Could you refresh some of the people on what a Type 3 Dogman is?
The whole scoop on that is, you've got in my opinion, two main categories of cryptids, creatures out there roaming the woods that people call dogmen. You've got what I call a canine type. It looks like the traditional modern-day werewolf, like what you would see on the movies, like Underworld, for example. They can look like that. They can look a little different from that, too. But you've also got a category that is called Type 3 that looks very similar to what you would expect a Bigfoot to look like, but this specimen has got a muzzle, whereas a Bigfoot has a flat face like a human, for example. And also, the Type 3s have claws. Now, understand, there are a lot of people out there that mistakenly think that type 3s are a type of Bigfoot, but they can't be. Every indication, when you look at the features Sasquatch seem to have, they seem to have toenails, they seem to have fingernails, and other physical traits that point towards them being a type of ape. Well, apes are primates, that's no surprise to anyone. Understand that primates don't have claws. Primates have nails, fingernails and toenails. The fact that type 3 dogmen have claws would preclude the chance of them being a primate. In other words, that would take away the chance of them being a type of Sasquatch. Claws, they have their own blood supply, they're attached to bone, whereas fingernails don't have that blood supply, and they are not attached to bone. There are definite differences between the two. Having said all that, when you look at these pics on the YouTube version of the show, you'll see that these prints look very similar to Bigfoot prints, but the one noticeable difference is they appear to have claws at the ends of each toe print. Moving forward, you told me that you've got an update on the story that you shared in episode 14 about your girlfriend's grandmother's encounter that she had in Morocco, I think you said?
It was actually the place that's next to Morocco. See, I made the mistake because I thought her grandmother lived there her entire life. And I realized, oh no, when she was a child, she lived in Algeria, which is next to Morocco. It's pretty much the same kind of environment, the northern top part that's near it's sort of closer to Spain. It's like there's a giant, the Algerian Sea is like between that and Spain, and they were at the northern part on the waters of that. Now, back then, there used to be a lot of forest. A lot of forest. If you go on Google Maps now or Google Earth, you're going to look at it and you're going to go, hey, there's not a lot of forest there. How could they be there? Well, back then, there was a lot of forest, and this was 1935. And well, actually, tell you the truth, it's not even that far away. Really, if you look at the map from, what's the name? Italy. Yeah, Italy. It's just like across the sea. There are parts of the sea that are not that far. It would be very difficult for something to skip across to one island and then finally over to Italy or vice versa. So and they are known to travel. That's another thing people need to understand. Just because in your area, if you think, oh well, nothing could ever show up here. Oh yeah, they could. They show up in the darndest places. See, when I was told this, my girlfriend didn't really know much about Dogman. She didn't know much about any of this stuff. Like most people, she didn't know. And when she told me stuff, I filled her in. And she was very much wowed by it, you know. And that happens quite often on the show. People will talk to Vic. And Vic, you'll notice that they'll say things that collaborate with each other. You know, if you're a detective and you're hearing collaborating evidence like this, you're getting pretty close to having an arrest and conviction. So I'm saying people need to understand the concepts of what we're dealing with here. See, what happened back then in 1935, that's a long time ago. When she died when she was 85. It was actually like a year ago in the fall. And my girlfriend spent a lot of time with her grandmother. She used to, you know, play with her grandmother and tease her and stuff like that. And her grandmother would joke around with her back, and they used to love it. It's the way they were. Well, this is one thing that she never teased her about. She did it once when she was really little and decided not to do that again because it's something that stuck with her her entire life, all the way until she was 85. What happened was, and I'm just going to reconstruct the whole thing, what happened, just so people can understand it. They haven't heard episode 14 yet. What happened was her grandmother, and it's actually her sister, last time I said it was her neighbor, and they went out into the woods to collect firewood early in the morning. Now, back then, they lived in a different time than they do nowadays. Children are a little more free to run around and whatnot and do things and help out and be a part of the community in their household. And so they went out to get wood for the breakfast for that morning. They lived in a small village, and they weren't rich. They weren't that well off. They just had, like, these houses made of wood, not shacks or anything like that. The house was sitting on concrete, so it wasn't, like, ridiculously poor. But it just wasn't like a rich thing. It was simply just like a wooden house. That's important for later, and I'll get into that. Now, they went into the woods, and they were looking for firewood, and it was still dark out, and apparently, from the right of them, out of nowhere, emerged like a 7-foot dog man. Immediately, they noticed all the detail. It was right next to them. It was like literally just a few feet away from them. It didn't even really look at them, but it acknowledged their existence with its disgruntled, angry kind of vocalization, like maybe it's scared away something it was hunting. It didn't really spend, it was like, I guess they were too puny for it to really respond to too much. But it was very angry and very upset. It had the full dog head look. It had the claws, the hands. It had even hips, was what she said. Like a man's hips. And very strong legs. The legs were canine. And like you mentioned before, Vic, I want to say the last encounter, those were claws and not nails. Nails would not do that. The claws that killed that man before, they were claws, and they said they were claws. So that's important to note that authorities said those were claws. Now, they thought that when this thing emerged that they were going to die. And it just ran off in like a couple of bounds into the woods, and then it was gone. They said not only was it gone out of sight, it was gone out of sound. It didn't make any more sound. It was huge, but it didn't make any more sound. This is what unnerved me when she told me these details, because what I ran into in the dark that one night, long ago, whatever it was ran at me, it seemed to have intent. And I don't know what it was. At first I thought, because I thought it was my friend, that the intent was to scare me or something, or to freak me out. Not that it was I want to freak him out intent, it was just intent. I assumed the intent was to just kind of jump out in the woods and go boo kind of a thing. But once it stopped, I didn't sense that anymore. And I said, "How you doing, Steve?" And it turned into confusion. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up at this point is because when it ran away, just as I heard my friend's voice, it did like a 180 and turned and started to bound away. I say bounding because I couldn't make out the footsteps. It didn't sound like, 1, 2, 1, 2, but it also didn't sound like 4 legs. It sounded like a weird collaboration of maybe both. But I heard it for the first few couple bounds or first couple steps, and then I heard silence. But people have to understand that when you're back in those bush-like areas, like I have been for years, I hear people going through the woods for like yards and yards and yards. I mean, it's like like an elephant in a china factory. It's a bush. It's not just a forest. It's noisy. I mean, there's a lot of broken branches all over the ground and everything. It's easy to hear them. But when it gets with pads, foot pads, it's easy to end up going into prowl mode. But it went silent just after about 30 feet. And so when she mentioned that, it scared the dickens out of me. In the story, they took off and ran back home and told their parents. And their parents right away believed them. Because people in the village, they would talk about these things in the woods. Like they had a healthy relationship with wolves that lived around the area. And they were fine with the wolves. They were happy with the wolves. They used to sometimes feed them. You hear about stories people have when it comes to having like this sort of a village relationship with a pack of wolves. You can actually look this kind of stuff up and find people getting along with them. It was actually that kind of relationship. Wolves didn't mind them every once in a while. They got fed by them and left them alone. And, it's a healthy respect kind of a thing. I don't think people should feed wolves, though. These people back then, they grew up around in the wilderness areas like this, so they knew what they were doing. So I don't suggest people do that because there's probably a right and wrong to do everything. And the wrong part of that could be being bitten or worse. So don't do that. But they had a good relationship with them. But unfortunately, they knew these other things were out there, and they said to people not to go out there. Don't go out in those woods. And here's the ironic part. People would go missing, including children, and they would never see them again. And I can't say 100% that they're all Dogman, but to say they're not, I think it's pretty ignorant, or at least extraordinarily naive. Now, the rest of this story gets a little more disturbing if you had any kind of experience before like this. Apparently, before and after this encounter, they have actually had, in the middle of the night, something banging on the walls of their house. And like I said before, their houses are made of wood. Not like a cabin, which has really thick walls necessarily. Some cabins are made of logs and stuff. This isn't like logs. These are boards. So whatever hits the house, it's like it's standing right there. And it would freak everyone else in the house out. And every once in a while, they would hear outside the windows heavy breathing. It's the same heavy breathing they heard out in the woods. That's another thing I forgot to mention, is that the breathing had a very deep breathing sound it made when it came out of the woods. And it had very deep red eyes. Actually, the eyes were really, really red. And I asked her, was it glowing or was it just red naturally? And she said, I couldn't tell. Well, not that she couldn't tell, but her grandmother said that she couldn't tell. They couldn't tell if it was glowing or if it was actually just a reflection. Probably a reflection because they have great night vision. So it's hard to say, but some animals, apparently when they get angry, it turns out even people, sometimes you hear about their eyes changing color. And there's probably some reason for that, but I'm not a biologist, I don't know. So anyways, so in the middle of the night, sometimes they would have that happen even before and after, like they were letting their presence known. You know, like stay away from the woods, we're out there. And I don't know about you, Vic, but if I was in a house and I heard heavy breathing like that outside my window, I'd move. And it turns out actually that they did. They ended up moving to the next village over where it wasn't as bad, or not actually happening much at all. For some reason, that one area was singled out.
Yeah, if something like that happened to me, John, I definitely have a Century 21 moment.
That's good.
Now, John, you sent me 3 pictures that show the area where you had this encounter that night. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post them in the YouTube version of this show so that the listeners can not only look at the footprint photos from Australia, but they can also take a look at these 3 photos that you sent me as well. If you don't mind, please tell us what to look for in each of the 3 pics.
The first picture, you'll see a root system and some trees. And the roots are almost like a stepping place where you can easily get up onto the plateau. That little root system you see there, I've walked up about 1,000 times in my life. And where this took place was really close to the encounter I had. It's about 50 or 30 feet to the left of that root system I was talking about in the interview. While I heard what was over there, I could hear it as I was climbing up. And I remember thinking that was my buddy probably just getting wood or something, right? And thinking he's probably going to try to jump me. So I was walking up there, and I was starting to turn to the left, and I'd start to walk through the bush right to the campsite, knowing he was probably going to jump out, you know, the way guys are with each other and try to scare me. And that's when it charged at me. Now, after the incident, and if people want to hear about the details of that, they'd have to go back and check it out on episode 14 for more details if they want to. But there's one detail I will give, though, and that is when it charged me, and I smiled. I said, "How you doing, Steve?" And then it stood there. I'm telling you, when it charged me, some people think it sounds like some kind of a bluff charge. This thing got within like a few feet of me. I could have slapped it, you know. And remember, I didn't know what was going on. I looked off, and as soon as I heard my friend off in the distance, after I said, "How you doing, Steve?" the second time, this thing, I got this feeling, the intention went from whatever it was before, I just sensed intention, to like a sense of confusion. And I think it was because my mistaking it for something else, like my buddy, made it think, you know, this guy's up to something weird and didn't want to mess with me, because animals don't usually want to risk a lot by attacking if they're unsure about what their target is and what's going on. Because injury in the woods and the wild usually means death to animals. I think that's the one sense, and people should take that into account when understanding why animals don't just go crazy and attack people. Now, what happened was, when I ran towards my buddy, who was over in the campsite about a strong stone throw from this area here, I ran out of this next area in this next picture. You'll see this forest with this path. So you see this tree-like area with sort of a river to the left, and usually during the summer it's dried up. But you can clearly see how dark it is in that campsited area in there. It's very dark, and at night it's like pitch black. And I ran on that trail running towards where I took that camera picture. And so basically when I said that I ran and it was dark and I couldn't see, and eventually I started seeing the flicker of the the flames from the campfire, it kind of screwed up my night vision. Well, you can see the ground, how it's starting to go up, and then, well, it starts to go up and down like crazy, like a roller coaster, and I started tripping and falling. So you have an idea of the kind of grounding I was dealing with. But, yeah, that's how dark it was in there. So you can see even during the day with the sun this bright, you look in there, it's dark. So imagine what I went through when I ran into that thing. There's no chance of even seeing an outline around 12 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock. I think it was around maybe 11:30. And then the last picture, you'll notice there's a log and there's like some sticks on the ground. That's where my buddy was camping. That's where he ran in looking like a a wild man. Like I saw something in the woods that would put the fear of the dead in anyone's eyes. Basically, I ran into the light radius of the campfire in that last picture where the campfire would have been. There's sticks on the ground, and there's a big giant log, and that's where my buddy was camping. And I ran into that area looking like a possessed man. And they were looking at me like, what's wrong? And I was looking at the borderline of where the light radius was and waiting for something to come through the woods to do us harm and stuff. And I'm telling you, it was one of the most, I think the longest moments, the first 2 minutes, when I ran into that light radius, actually. I mean, I was reflecting back and thinking about it, like, what was it like when I first ran back to this area? Because last time I didn't really talk about it too much. It was long. Because what happened in my mind's eye view at this point, I went from, this is my friend, to this was like a potential monster. Because it didn't reflect anything that even begins to be around the area where I live. And so my mind was split between reality and what I thought was fantasy kind of a thing, right? I didn't know what I was going to run into. So, let's put it this way. I had no need for caffeine. I was wide awake. And I stayed wide awake for a couple hours after that. And then I decided, for some strange reason, that I didn't want to sit there for the rest of the night. And around 2 or 3 in the morning, I sharpened a stick and walked home and said to myself, if anything jumps me, I'm just, I was still afraid. I wasn't stupid. I just wanted to go home, and the thing had me rattled, and I just wanted to get home. But that's where it all happened. That's 3 good shots of where it all took place, and I took those a few years ago, actually.
You know what? I'm so glad, John, that you didn't get a chance to see whatever it was, what it looked like.
Yeah, just hearing it and experiencing what I did experience was bad enough. People think, my God, you got something charged at you in the middle of the night, and it didn't match any known animal around, and it had all these strange characteristics. And I mean, some of the stuff I learned after the facts, like it made noise, basically rustling around doing its own thing, but when it took off, after about 30, 40 feet, it stopped making sound. I never ran into anything that stopped making sound after that, especially in these woods, because these woods are really bushy, and they make noise. I could hear people so far away. I could tell if someone's at this campsite, the third plateau here, that's what it's called. This is where it took place, that dark hole where the forest is. When that happened there, people camped there. I have camped there and had campfires there since I was 15 years old. And I'm telling you, it can get very dark in there. It's very isolated, but when you could easily hear people there. I mean, you could be way back walking. You could be another 2 or 3 minutes to getting there walking, and you could clearly still hear people over there sometimes, depending on what they're doing. But you can definitely hear people in the woods. And for that thing to stop making sound, just like what happened with my girlfriend's grandmother, when the thing took a couple leaps and bounds and it was gone in the woods and made no sound, it reflected exactly what I heard back there in that dark spot. It looks creepy even during the day. Like, look at that. At night, it's really hard to see.
Those 2 pictures are very creepy. Like you mentioned, in that area where you ran out of, towards where you snapped the photo, you can see it's broad daylight outside of that canopy, but underneath the canopy, it's dark. It's just black.
It's funny you mention that because that's what I noticed. I ran out of there because I ran towards where the picture was taken. I ran towards the cameraman, which was me, later. And I came out and I could see, but when I was in there, I couldn't see. I mean, previously before, I think you thought that I saw the outline. I didn't get to see an outline. I couldn't see anything. In fact, I could sense it because my voice was bouncing off something. Like if you were near a telephone pole, you could sense some, your voice bouncing back a bit from it. People could do these tests where they blindfold themselves, they go close to something, the voice will bounce back. It's the same kind of thing, right? But I was looking for a head shape. Couldn't see anything. It was that pitch dark. But I am naturally good in the dark, so I knew which direction to turn and stuff like that. at the very first place, so I knew where I was going. I would have to keep these things in my head. And when it ran away, like, I pictured the whole thing in my mind. I've been there so many times, I just know it really well, like the middle of your living room kind of a thing, right? So I was able to easily be able to find this little path and then run out. But I love that place. Unfortunately, I don't feel safe enough to ever go back unless I have a bunch of people with me, or I can't let other people go alone, kind of a thing. So if I have more information in the future or more encounters, unfortunately, which I don't want to have, I'll let you know, Vic, for the sake of the people, so they have more understanding of what's going on. But personally, I would never want to run anything like that ever again.
Given what you know about now with regards to dogmen, and given what happened to you that night back in those woods, I don't think anyone could blame you for being a little timid about the idea of going back there. So that's perfectly understandable. Well, I'll tell you what, John, it's about time to wrap the show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, just for people to be extraordinarily careful when they're out there. Understand that if you feel like you have to go in the woods, keep your eye out. If you think there's a dogman around or you feel an unnatural feeling of fear, don't fight it. Leave. But leave in a calm manner. Don't test anything like this. If you happen to run into something like this or think it's there, don't panic. Don't be afraid anyways. Just understand that this is something that could exist that's out there. Okay? And when I say could exist, I mean you could actually run into it. But you most likely won't. And if you do, it most likely won't do anything to you. But here's the thing. You need to be informed. You need to understand what these things are. And that's why listening to Vic's show is such a great idea. Because you learn about, what people are running into and what's the best way to avoid these things. And sometimes it's better just to avoid the whole subject of going in the woods in the first place. But if you do go in the woods, go in groups, because I think that's the safest way to go. And if someone's hell-bent on seeing a dogman, just maybe stay in your car, drive around, keep your eye out, do that. Just, it's important to be safe and be informed, not be afraid. That's all I can say.
Good words as always, John. I really do appreciate the compliments. I don't deserve most of them, that's for sure, but nonetheless, I appreciate it. I also appreciate, like I said, you coming on. Thanks again for coming back.
No problem, Vic. And if I have any more updates, I'll definitely let you know.
That sounds good. Well, as always, don't be a stranger, okay?
Absolutely, Vic.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you want to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.